on to reading Healing the Child Within. Now I am finishing this chapter of child abuse. Mental, physical, sexual, mental, emotional, and or spiritual. Child abuse is common in all sorts of troubled families. While severe physical abuse and overt sexual abuse are clearly recognizable as traumatic to infants and children, other forms of child abuse may be more difficult to recognize as being abusive. These may include mild to moderate physical abuse, covert or less obvious sexual abuse, mental and emotional abuse, child neglect, and ignoring or thwarting the child's spirituality or spiritual growth. Examples of covert or more subtle sexual abuse include appearance flirting, relating sexual experiences, stories or jokes, touching children, adolescents or even adult children in appropriate parts of their autonomy, and any other unnecessary sexually stimulating behavior. These forms of abuse usually result in deep-seated feelings of intense guilt and shame that are unconsciously carried into adulthood. I will address emotional abuse in more detail later. Spiritual abuse is likely to be controversial, rarely discussed, yet real. For example, raising a child to be an atheist or occultist may seem like spiritual abuse to some parents, but not others. More subtle forms taught by some organized religions are the strong teaching of an angry deity inflicting guilt or shame, or insisting that certain other denominations or belief systems are automatically bad or inferior. While the later may be easily observed in some fundamentalist Christian denominations, they are no means limited to these, since such characteristics pervade many of our world's religious systems. Indeed, these views are often major factors starting and continuing the many wars that have been fought around the world. Other conditions stifle our true self. Some more examples, and found under post-traumatic stress disorder, discussed in Chapter 7. Some commonalities. These 7 parental conditions often exist in mixtures among troubled families. The stifling of child within, or use perhaps stronger language, the murder of the child's soul, has certain common dynamics within the family. These may include inconsistency, unpredictability, and chaos. Inconsistency and unpredictability tend to repress spontaneity and are generally crazy-making. Combined with irritableness, these dynamics may promote the core issue of difficulty trusting or fear of abandonment, as well as chronic depression. They result in a chaotic environment. These precludes the development of a safe, secure, it's like this book was meant for me, I don't know about you guys, secure and reliable foundation from which to learn about ourselves and others through risk-taking. Okay, inconsistent. Many troubled families are inconsistent and some are not. One way that many troubled families are consistent is through constantly denying the feelings of many family members and having one or more family secrets. Troubled families that are rigid tend to be more consistent and predictable. Because they are less excessive, these qualities function to control and shut down family and individual growth. Unpredictable. Many troubled families are predictable in their unpredictability. That is, family members learn that they can expect the unexpected at any time. By contrast, many of us will know what to predict and even when to predict it, although they may not know it consciously or talk about it with others. However, they usually live in chronic fear, as though walking on eggshells, or of when they will suffer with their next trauma. Arbitrary. The arbitrariness means that no matter who the family member is or how hard they may try, the troubled person or persons will still mistreat them in the same way. In a family where rules have no rhyme or reason, the child loses trust in the rule setters and in their own self. They are unable to understand the environment. However, while the more rigid families be less arbitrary, they can still be troubled, painful, and dysfunctional, and they are often arbitrary about their rigidity. Chaotic. Chaos may be manifested by any of the following. 1. Physical or emotional abuse, which teaches the child shame, guilt, and don't feel. 2. Sexual abuse, which teaches the same, plus distrust and fear of losing control. 3. Regular and repeated crises, which teach crisis orientation to life. 4. Predictable, closed communications, which teaches don't talk, don't be real, and denial. 5. Loss of control, which teaches obsession with being in control, and fusion or loss of boundaries or individuation. I don't know where all these ants are coming from. There's no food out here. Like, what the hell? Sorry, guys. While dysfunctional families tend to be chaotic, in many troubled families, chaos is either absent or minimal. Here, chaos is often subtle in its manifestations. Active or overt chaos does not have to be present to stifle our child within. Rather, just the threat of chaos, whether it be the threat of crisis, threat of mistreatment of any form, or threat of seeing another family member mistreated, no matter how simple or transient, can be just as damaging. It does so by installing fear, which blocks our being real and creative. When we cannot be real and creative, we cannot discover, explore, and complete our stories and thereby grow and develop. We cannot have peace. Even if active chaos occurs only once or twice a year, the threat of unpredictability, impulsiveness, and destructiveness to self and others is enough to chronically destroy peace and serenity. The family member in the middle of the chaos, whether active or threatened, may feel that this is so routine and so normal that he or she does not recognize it as chaos. This principle is true for all characteristics in this chapter. Mistreatment. Child mistreatment, maltreatment, or abuse in various forms can be subtle, although clearly damaging to the growth, to development and aliveness of our true self. Examples in Table 5. Denial of feelings and reality. Troubled families tend to deny feelings, especially the painful feelings of the members. The child and many of the adults are not allowed to express feelings, especially painful, also called negative, ones such as anger. However, each family usually has at least one member, generally the alcoholic or simply troubled person, who is permitted to express painful feelings openly, especially anger. In such families where the anger is chronic and unexpressed directly by members, it often takes other forms: abuse of self, others, and other antisocial behavior in various forms of acute and chronic illness, including stress-related illness. What the child sees as reality is denied, and a new model, view, or false belief system of reality is assumed as true by each family member. This fantasy often binds the family together in a further dysfunctional way. This denial and new belief system stifle and retard the child's development and growth in a crucial mental, emotional, and spiritual areas of life. To repeat, while discovering some of the conditions described here, you may feel uncomfortable. It can start the way out of our suffering and confusion. We can summarize the common characteristics of troubled or dysfunctional families as including at least one, although usually several of the following: neglectful, mistreating, inconsistent, unpredictable, arbitrary, denying, having one or more secrets, disallowing feelings, disallowing other needs, rigid, chaotic at times, quiet and functional at times. Other characteristics of troubled families may include a variety of neglect and mistreatment. Reading about and reflecting upon examples of mistreatment or trauma can help us find our true self. Although helpful is hearing others tell their stories of mistreatment or trauma, but one of the best ways to begin validating our own mistreatment or trauma is to tell our own story in the company of people who accept and support us and who will not betray our confidence or reject us. I call such people safe and supportive, and describe these principles in the following chapters. Chapter 6, the dynamics of shame and low self-esteem. Shame or low self-esteem plays a major role in stifling our child within. Shame is both a feeling or emotion and experience that happens to the total self, which is our true self or child within. It is also a dynamic or process that happens to us, especially when we are unaware, and sometimes even when we become aware of the truth about many of the aspects of our shame. Growing up in a troubled or dysfunctional family is nearly always associated with shame and low self-esteem in all members of the family. Only the manifestations of shame vary among family members. We each adapt to shame in our own way. The major similarity is that nearly everyone operates primarily from their false self. We thus describe the troubled or dysfunctional family as being shame-based. Guilt. People often confuse shame with guilt. While we feel both, there is difference between them. Guilt is the uncomfortable or painful feeling that results from doing something that violates or breaks a personal standard or value, or from hurting another person, or even from breaking an agreement or law. Guilt thus concerns our behavior, feeling bad about what we have done or bad about what we didn't do, what we were supposed to have done. Like most feelings, guilt can be a useful emotion to help guide us in relationships and with ourselves and others. Guilt tells us that our conscience is functioning. People who never experience guilt or remorse after transgressions have difficulty in their lives, and classically have said to have antisocial personality disorder. Also known as sociopathic. Guilt that is useful and constructive we call healthy guilt. We use this kind of guilt to live in our society, to resolve our conflicts or difficulties, to correct our mistakes, or to improve our relationships. When guilt is detrimental to our serenity, our peace of mind, and our functioning, including our mental, emotional, and spiritual growth, we call it unhealthy guilt. People from troubled or dysfunctional homes or environments often have a mixture of healthy and unhealthy guilt. Unhealthy guilt is usually not handled or worked through and lingers on, at times becoming psychologically and emotionally disabling. Our responsibility to family overcomes our responsibility to our true self. There may also be survivor guilt, whereas the person feels guilty and unworthy for leaving and abandoning others in troubled environment, or surviving in life after others have failed. PTSD survivor. Guilt can be relieved substantially by recognizing its presence and by working through it. This means that we experience it and discuss it with trusted and appropriate others. In its simplest resolution, we may apologize to the person whom we have harmed or deceived and ask for their forgiveness. In its more complex forms, we may have a talk about the guilt in more depth, perhaps in group or individual therapy. Guilt is usually easier to recognize and resolve than it is shame. Shame is the uncomfortable or painful feeling that we experience when we realize that a part of us is defective, bad, incomplete, rotten, phony, inadequate, Dad's saying phony a lot, or failure. In contrast to guilt, whereas we feel bad from doing something wrong, we feel shame from being something wrong or bad. Thus, guilt seems to be correctable and forgivable, whereas there seems to be no way out of shame. Our child within, our true self, feels the shame and can express it in a healthy way to safe and supportive people. Our false self, on the other hand, pretends not to have the shame and would never tell anyone about it. But we all have shame. Shame is universal to being human. If we do not work through it and let it go of it, shame tends to accumulate and burden us more and more until we become its victim. In addition to feeling defective or inadequate, shame makes us believe that others can see through us, through our facade, and into our defectiveness. Shame feels hopeless, that no matter what we do, we cannot correct it. We feel isolated and lonely with our shame, as though we are only one who has the painful feeling. What is more, we may say, I'm afraid to tell you about my shame, because if I do, you think I'm bad, and I cannot stand hearing how bad I am. And so not only do I keep it to myself, but I often block it out or pretend that it's not there. I may even disguise my shame as it were some other feeling or action and project it onto other people. Some of these feelings and actions may mask or bind our shame include anger, resentment, rage, blame, contempt, attack, control, perfectionism, neglect or withdrawal, abandonment, disappointment, and compulsive behavior. And when I feel or act out of any of these disguises, it serves a a useful purpose to my codependent or false self, acting as a defense against my feeling the shame. But even though I may defend myself well against my shame, it can still be seen by others. Example, when I hang my head slumped down, avoid eye contact, or apologize for having needs and rights. I may feel somewhat nauseated, cold, withdrawn, alienated. But no matter how well I may defend myself and others against it, my shame will not go away unless I learn what it is, experience it, and share it with safe and supportive others. In therapy, an example of this, guys, that our shame can happen in a group therapy, Jim, a 35-year-old accountant, began to tell relationship with his father who lives in another state. Every time we talk on the phone, he tries to judge me. I get so confused that I want to hang up. Jim talked more and interacted with the group, who asked him what feelings were coming up for him right now. He had difficulty becoming aware and identifying his feelings and made little eye contact with the group. I'm just confused. I always wanted to be perfect around him, and I never could do it to his satisfaction. He talked further, and the group asked him again what feelings were coming up for him right now. I feel some fear, some hurt, and I guess I'm a little angry. As the group leader, I also asked him if he might be feeling some shame, as though he's somehow an inadequate person. He said no. Why would you think that? I pointed out his drive to be perfect, his avoidance of eye contact, and the way he described his relationship with his father suggested to me that he was feeling some shame. A tear came to his eye, and he said he would have to think about that. Where does our shame come from? Our shame seems to come from what we do with negative messages, negative affirmations, beliefs, and rules that we hear as we grow up. We hear these from our parents, parent figures, and other people in authority, such as teachers and clergy. These messages basically tell us we are somehow not all right, not okay, that our feelings, our needs, our true self, our child within is not acceptable. Over and over, we hear messages like, shame on you, you're so bad, you're not good enough. We hear them so often and from people on whom we're so dependent and to whom we are so vulnerable that we believe them. And so we incorporate or internalize them into our very being. As if that were not enough, the wound is compounded by negative rules that stifle and prohibit the otherwise healthy healing and needed expression of our pains. Rules like don't feel, don't cry, and children are to be seen and not heard. And so not only do we learn that we are bad, but that we are not to talk openly about it. However, these negative rules are often inconsistently enforced, as described in the previous chapter. The result? Difficulty in trusting rule makers and authority figures, feelings of fear, guilt, and more shame. And where do our parents learn these negative messages and rules? Most likely from their parents and other authority figures. This example of childhood trauma here as emotional abuse being transmitted from one generation to the next. Negative rules. Don't express your feelings. Don't get angry. Don't get upset. Don't cry. Don't do as I say, not as I do. Be good, nice, perfect. Avoid conflict. Don't think or talk. Just follow directions. Do well in school, no matter what. Don't ask questions. Don't betray the family. Don't discuss the family outsiders. Keep family secrets. Be seen and not heard. No back talk. Don't contradict me. Always look good. I'm always right, you're always wrong. Always be in control. Focus on alcoholics drinking. Drinking is not the cause of our problems. Always maintain status quo. Everyone in the family must be an enabler of dysfunction. Negative messages. Shame on you. You're not good enough. I wish I never had you. Your needs are not all right with me. Hurry up and grow up. Be dependent. Be a man. Big boys don't cry. Act like a nice girl. You don't feel that way. Don't be like that. You're so stupid. You caused it. You owe it to us. Of course we love you. I'm sacrificing myself for you. How can you do this to me? We won't love you if you're driving me crazy. You'll never accomplish anything. It didn't really hurt. You're so selfish. You'll be the death of me yet. That's not true. I promise. But break it. They break it. You make me sick. We wanted a boy/girl. ... The shame-based family. When everyone in a dysfunctional family becomes from and communicates with others from a base of shame, it may be described as being shame-based. Parents in such a family did not have their needs met as infants and children, nor usually as they continue into adulthood. They often use children to meet many of their unmet needs. Shame-based families often, though not always, have a secret. This secret may span all kinds of shameful conditions, from family violence to sexual abuse, to alcoholism, to being in a concentration camp, or the secret may be as subtle as a lost job, a lost promotion, or a lost relationship. Keeping such secrets disables all family members, whether or not they know the secret. This is because being secretive prevents expressions of questions, concerns, and feelings. And the family thus cannot communicate freely, and the child within of each family member refrains stifled, unable to grow and to develop. So next we're talking about boundaries. And then the chapter 7 goes into the role of post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma. Then the next chapter after that, beginning to deal with your core issues, all or nothing thinking, all this stuff that we all have difficulty, I do have difficulty with. Grieving process. Okay. See you in the next video. You're good enough, and we'll heal together.